So I checked online, haven't heard anything from the bishops' conference yet. I guess it's going to be later today.
Yeah, I guess they did the voting after their 2 hours or so of discussion. And it was going to be released today, the results of the voting. But I guess, for one thing, the voting just appears to be for the preparation of this document that would then be voted on, discussed and voted on in November.
Huh?
So maybe it's just as well to bring the whole damn thing to a head rather than let it fester for another 6 months.
Yeah. Fester may or may not be the right word for it. There may be some intentional stirring the pot, hoping the faithful will.
Oh, of course, there will be plenty of stirring the pot.
Yeah.
Actually, there will be, no matter how today's vote goes. I think we're so immensely polarized.
Well, I'm definitely interested in what conversations go on at my parish on Sunday.
Yeah.
We still haven't opened the library, but I think I'm going to go to the library anyway and just see what happens.
Might not be a bad idea.
Our library is right off the patio that is a gathering place next to the church. And the library is attached to the parish hall building.
Right. I believe you gave me a tour some years back.
That's right.
At least.
Good memory.
Probably, I think I was still in the parish, so it was probably 6 years or more.
And we went up to see the mosaic and all.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that mosaic doesn't fit very much with your artistic taste.
Well, I'm not too sure. I don't remember. I don't exactly remember that one.
It's a big, I'll send you a copy of the picture if you want, but big image of the risen Christ, of the crucified Christ, and then the risen Christ.
Oh.
And so it visually links the celebration at the Mass with the death and resurrection. Hi,
Yeah.
Ned.
Yeah. Hello, Ned.
Hi, John. Hi, Tom.
Yeah, I think I do remember seeing it now. It's one of Pichek's works, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Talking about the mosaic, Ned, at St. John Newman, the mosaic behind the altar.
Oh, yeah.
Big Christ has died, Christ is risen, and then we focus on the Mass at the altar.
Here comes George Farrick.
Hi, George. Good morning.
Morning, George.
Good morning, George.
Ed, hi, John. Hi, Tom.
Okay. So let's see. We are lacking only George Crook.
Is
You're right there.
who's coming too? Or I'm asking, I guess.
Phil Berryman.
Phil, yeah.
Well, I'm not too sure. I did not send him a link. Did anybody else?
No.
Okay. With all the stuff happening this week, I never really thought of that because of the surprise that we had with uh,
Oh, with Fred last
Fred
week.
last week,
Yeah,
when we were planning to have our own group of five, kind of debriefing it all, and then he came on and it was a good session, but I was just wondering if we needed to debrief the whole situation of guests. Um, I don't know if Fred might be planning to join us. Has anybody been in touch with Fred?
no.
No,
Not
I just,
I, no.
I haven't either, other than his sending out his revised little paper,
Yes,
not so little paper, actually.
not so little is
Not
right.
so little.
And weighty, not just volume, but content.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if maybe we're just meant to be the five of us today, and
Yeah, well, let
maybe
me-
look for Phil next
I
Friday.
hope we are, but,
well, yeah, well, let me ask you this. Right now, does Phil expect to be on the call? Is he?
I'm not,
expecting to get-
I don't think so, because I did, if I remember rightly, I did say I would send him the link before the meeting, and I did not do that.
Okay.
I only sent the meeting link to the five of us. Hello,
Uh-huh.
George.
hi, George.
So I don't know if there is anything remedial or whatever that will have to be done with regard to him. He seemed interested, but again, maybe I neglected, or maybe I have to say, I was thrown a little bit of a curve by the fact that Fred was on last week. Because we were going to discuss the whole area of how should we integrate visitors, and probably it's going to be as near as I can tell, it's going to be an ongoing discussion as to should we remain the five of us, or should we judiciously seek
Include others.
additional regular participation.
But I think it was George Farrick who suggested that maybe each guest be given an hour or an hour and 15 minutes. And that would give us a chance to debrief, but also make it clear that they were a guest for that session only. And my second thought is maybe having Berryman next week after we see what comes from the bishops' conference later today.
Yeah, and then we can include Phil in in a lot of the back and forth emails that we have.
Mhm.
We actually didn't have too many back and forth emails, including the whole group
Just last week.
this
True.
past week. Yeah,
Yeah,
sometimes it's been very, very lively.
I know.
George, you posted a question to pass along, which the others may not have seen since you sent it just before we started up. You want to voice that?
Yeah, Fred's not with us today, right?
Not
Well,
at the moment.
we
Apparently
didn't
not.
think he was going to be with us last week, and he joined us. That was part of the, I have not been personally in touch with him other than no, I don't think this last week I was at all, because I wanted to get a consensus of our group before anything.
Okay, well, I thought he was
Okay.
going to be here today.
Well, Fred just sent me an email 2 minutes ago that says I can't seem to get in rightly. Should I send him the link,
Yeah,
the full invitation? Okay.
sure.
Let me get that up.
Yeah, I wouldn't even mention we're confused about
Well,
what.
should Phil get the link too, saying, Phil, if you were expecting to be part of our group today, say,
Have at us, yeah.
here's the link. If not, we'll be in touch next week or to arrange the next time, but just say communications were a little bit up in the air.
Is that workable,
Yeah,
Tom?
we don't want to leave
I,
somebody. in the
I
lurch.
think so. Let me get back to Fred first and,
Okay.
you know, I copied the invitation.
Yeah. Meanwhile, John, Ned and George,
Yeah.
there's an email from me about 10 minutes ago, which is a question for Fred.
I just tried to find it and I couldn't.
Okay.
Well, maybe you haven't gotten it yet.
Yeah, I saw it, George. I didn't read it yet, but you want to say what it is in person or?
Yeah, that'd be good.
No, I want Ned to have to hunt for it.
What is it that we eat?
How many
when we eat
fingers,
the Eucharist?
George?
Eating
Yeah,
Okay, I got your question.
yeah. Basically, I found Fred's essay very hard to follow.
Confounding.
Yeah,
Did you, Ned?
Confounding. I mean,
Confounding.
first of all, there's the terminology. You know, the
yeah.
words that, you know, I looked 4 or 5 words up and then I thought to myself, wait a minute, what am I doing? You know.
Well, you're trying to understand it.
Yeah, but this isn't how this little pea brain thinks, you know.
Nor
and,
me.
and I'm one of the pea brain people that goes to mass and believes that there is Jesus, and
Yeah.
so I should be able to understand. I thought that what's his name? Joe Martus' article was quite good. And I was very satisfied with reading it and you know, being ready to talk about it. But I cannot talk about Fred's thing because I don't know what it's saying. I mean, it seems that we've switched
Well, here comes Fred.
from
You
the
can
present
ask him.
to the way we think or know, the way we know. I can see Fred telling us at the seminary what a concept is. Hi, Fred.
Here's Fred.
I love your background.
Hey, yeah, you look like you're out in
Like-
space somewhere.
Captain Kirk.
Now, Tom, I don't see Fred. At least not, I know, I'll do the whole.
Yeah,
Yeah,
do the gallery view. I'm
Captain
multitasking
Kirk,
here. I'm trying to get Phil in also.
Yeah, no, that's a great backdrop. Fred, you look like you're out
Out in the cosmos. You're out
touristing
in the-
through the cosmos.
Astronaut just came out of the pod and
Yeah, yeah. Are you
Tell
up there
us how
with
you
Jeff?
picked that, Fred.
Thanks for the help.
Well, basically, Fred, what you've missed so far, I think, is Ned and me professing our lack of understanding of your essay to us about the Eucharist. And hence the email I just sent, 15 minutes ago or so. I don't know if you've seen it yet, which was a question for Fred. And the question was, let me see if I can, when we receive the Eucharist, or something to that effect was my question. Is it physical or metaphorical-ish, or both? Question mark. And Fred, you may read that question and say, George, you don't understand a single thing that I'm trying to tell you, you idiot.
me too.
Okay, sorry to be
Well,
so.
that's okay.
Well,
I
think-
thought Lonergan, the quotations you have from, I don't know anything about Lonergan. you know,
Well, fear not.
I,
Fear
I
not.
enjoyed the quotations. I just got a good way with words, certainly.
True. That's true.
So,
Okay, let me say something about that. I think the first thing we need to recognize is that meals,
bless you.
meals, insofar as they're not just a matter of eating, uh, like you see people doing at McDonald's or most fast food restaurants. They more or less are the same as horses eating wheat. They're just filling up. They're getting the food they think they need. But when you move away from biological finality to the world of meaning, and especially constitutive meaning,
Putting aside one's naive
constitutive,
realism.
so constitutive realism, excuse me, constitutive meaning means that meaning pertains to the existence of the thing in such a way that if you change the meaning, you change the thing. As for example, the Supreme Court did when it redefined marriage in the United States as not just between a man and a woman, but what have you. So,
I like that. What happened?
so the symbolism of a meal, when you take the one you love out to dinner, or you invite her over to dinner and make the dinner as special as you can with candles and so forth. The meaning of the dinner is not just to eat, but it's to communicate the union with each other. So the godparent of my daughter, who helped me in so many ways, that family did, 2 doctors, when we sat down to eat with them and their 3 kids, before we even started eating, Erica would take a piece of bread out of the bread basket and break it up and pass around pieces to all of us to make clear that this meant we were getting together, we're going to be in union. And so that's the real constitutive meaning of the meal.
And it harkens back to the early Christians.
Correct. And so what I'm trying to say is the constitutive meaning is real. And you can't be more in union with God than you are in eating that particular meal, which is a sacrament, which is a sign that gives the grace that it signifies. And so I don't think you have to worry about the reality. You're getting in complete union, as you always thought you did, in terms of the real presence. that metaphor was a way of that really was a technical term, but it really became a metaphor. That people would understand that they're actually being in such a union with Christ that all the particles and whatever happens that you ingest is going into all the parts of your body the way food does, and so you're in complete union. But now the focus is on what did Jesus mean when he said, "Do this in memory of me." That you're not really just eating, but you are doing something that's closely connected to the passion and death of Christ, as well as the resurrection.
It's a memorial, yeah.
And so this is what it's all about. So that's why I thought of those. Quentin Connell, who's deceased, was a scripture scholar, and a Jesuit before he left the Jesuits. But for his dissertation, which he did on the Bible, he handled the feeding pericopes in the New Testament, and he noted that this, especially in the formulation of the ones I pointed out to you, where it says he took the bread, blessed it, broke it, and gave it away. That
And gave thanks.
yeah, and gave thanks in the other versions, yes, instead of
Well, the blessing is an act of thanksgiving. It's not a zapping of some superpower into the object.
absolutely,
It's an act of thanksgiving. The Jewish blessing was, we thank you and praise you, Lord, for this gift.
exactly. Thank you very much. Yes, that's exactly true. And so that's what's going on when we participate in the Eucharistic service and have go for communion. Yeah, with whatever species are available. So that's what I'm getting at. It's no less real if you don't think of it as substantially Jesus. It's more crucial that it's constitutively real, in the sense that you really are in line, lining yourself up with, and hoping to live in sincere way that you don't just live a Eucharistic life at communion, but you live a Eucharistic life taken, blessed, given away, broken and given away, the way Jesus did. And it seems to me that's what's important. And not only that, but the Eucharist gives you a way of being grateful in this in the very way that Tom was just saying. And part of the gratitude is having what Godfrey Diekman called sacramental sincerity, meaning you live out what you celebrated at the Mass, and you're given the grace to do that. And so if you take the Eucharist seriously, which you have done all your life, I'm sure that I'm confident that that's the way you've lived your life too. Not just getting a job to make money, but getting a job to serve people. And many times that calls for self-sacrificial actions and so forth. And so and not only in regard to your job, but in regard to your entire life.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I was trying to get at. Makes sense, George?
Yes.
That all, George and I were kind of in the same place, quandary, whatever, you know, you want to call it. But I'm, you know, hopefully not falling into naive realism. One of the first things you have in page 1 here.
Yeah, that was a big mistake to do that.
That sounds.
Well, you were clearing the ground. You know, you were clearing the brush away.
That's true.
Yeah, that's what I expected it to be part of the rest of it. You know, idealism and critical realism, et cetera, et cetera. But I have a. I'm sorry, Tom.
Oh, you'll go ahead, Ned.
Oh, okay. I take all of the stuff that Jesus said very seriously. I don't know. Yeah, obviously. And he said a whole lot of things about, well, relatively a lot of things about eating his flesh and drinking his blood.
Yeah.
He said it in such a way that it just shocked the Jews around him.
That's right.
The Jewish Testament the Old Testament forbids them to drink blood. And then just in common sense, how can that be? But he said it very clearly, and he saw people leave, and he let them go and asked the disciples, "Are you going to go too?" And the response, "You have the words of eternal life," means, I suppose, I don't understand, but I'm with you. You know, like
Sure, sure.
and then another time, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you shall not have life within you. And then at the Last Supper, this is my body and this is my blood. So contextually, the application, the culmination of the preparation that he made in his remarks happen at what Phil called the ultimate eschatological meal.
Yep.
And so we've got this meaning that we're now grappling with.
You know, this Friday group.
I'm sorry?
Yes.
Okay, so it seems to me that we need a foundation. And that foundation was given to us incrementally and then very directly by Jesus. And then he culminated all of that preparation at the Last Supper, which has all the elements that we've just talked about. Community, thanksgiving, breaking, giving, but without that foundation, in my PEP brain, the rest of it is inconsequential. You know, I believe that is really the body and blood of Jesus. It's his flesh and his blood, how abhorrent it was to the Jews at first. And then because of the Old Testament, ultimately, I guess, they begin to believe that, yeah, this is what we've all been prepared for. And the rest of it follows. So I don't want to be the kind of, or I don't want to do what we did in philosophy all the time. You know, here is the proposition, and then there's a division and subdivision and all of that kind of stuff. But we do have the foundation in the body and blood of Jesus. And then we gather and have our meal where it's made real. I hope I'm not repeating myself or just going in circles. But the significance of that meal is founded on the reality of his body and blood, which consecrates the meal, which sanctifies and gives the ultimate eschatological meaning to that gathering. We can have meals all we want, and we can call them, we can constitute them all kinds of things. But this one is always constituted by the flesh and blood of Jesus.
Ned, I would bet you, well, Fred could speak for himself, but I'll bet you Fred will say something like, no, Ned, I don't think the meaning is bottomed on the fact of Jesus's body and blood, but rather what Jesus did with his body and blood in the Triduum and at Easter, and that he wants us to commemorate.
I'm with you, George.
I
I'm
wouldn't,
with you, George, and I'm focused at this moment on Easter, the resurrection, and the road to Emmaus. And what did that meal entail? And they recognized him in the breaking of the bread.
right.
And what did they do but go out and announce as a product of that meal? That sticks with me every time I receive communion.
That's good.
Well,
Yeah.
I completely.
Well,
agree
but
with you.
that is saying, what's the meal? You know, what did they eat?
Well,
Uh,
okay, can I interject here a little bit? Because I think if we look back at the origins of, I guess, what we would call naive realism in Thomas's Aristotelian scholastic framework, one of the considerations that I would like to put is that physical is not a synonym with substantial,
Yeah.
even in that
Also
terminology.
made that clear, yeah.
Everything that you would say about physicality would have to do with accidents. So to say that Jesus is physically present in the Eucharist, physically present in the bread and wine, or that the bread and wine become physically the body and blood of Christ, I think that would be an incorrect statement.
Okay.
Okay. Now, substantially, whatever is meant by substantial is something that underlies the accidents, underlies the physical
It's
reality.
beyond the molecules.
Beyond the molecules, beyond the subatomic particles, beyond Higgs boson and all of that kind of stuff. How would I say? For talking about the real presence, the physicality is useless except as a human vehicle for us to kind of get in touch with what is substantial there. But what is substantial, and I realize I'm using the Thomistic terms, what is substantial is the body and blood of Christ, which is Christ himself. The distinction between the body and blood, I think, is very much identified or made present, shall we say, if we look at the entirety of the words of institution. Jesus did not just say, this is my body, this is my blood. He said, for one thing, he said, he defined an action. Take and eat, take and drink. He did not say take and worship, I always use as a little footnote. But take and eat, take and drink. And then he said, this is my body, which is given up for you. So however Jesus is present there, he is present in his sacrifice. His act of self-outpouring, that is the sacrifice of Christ, is how he is present there. And the reason why I think we can say that easily and really is that if it is the risen Jesus, the risen Christ, to put in kind of simple terms, in his resurrection, he didn't say, oh boy, I'm glad all that's over. You know, he carries into his risen presence, and therefore carries into his mystical body, the church, that one sacrifice. So wherever he is present, his sacrifice is present.
I'll bet you he was glad it was all over, whether he said it or not.
Well, certainly in some sense, I'm sure he was. But he probably said, I'm glad also to have done it, and I would do it again if I needed to.
Sure.
So, humanly speaking, from the way that we might look at things, yeah, I would say he was okay. I'm glad that that's over. But in other words, it's not like he put down his credit card and it got debited once and for all, that was it. No, he is continually uniting himself with his body, the entire body, his church, his people, us, in his sacrifice to bring about not just, gee, a nice presence. Oh boy, I'm so happy that Jesus is present with me, at least until my digestive juices get rid of the bread. And that's the way a lot of people think, isn't it? And that's the way our church seems to talk. But this is the gift that was given to us so that we might be united with the whole Christ, which is inseparable from his sacrifice, as well as inseparable from the body of baptized believers. So, so what we have here is it's one single real presence, but it's a multifaceted presence. I think that might be one way of looking at it and understanding it. Similarly, the wine. Take and drink. This is the cup of my blood, the blood of the new and eternal covenant, which is poured out for you and for all, so that sins may be forgiven. So it is the blood of the covenant. In that aspect of his sacrifice, the new covenant is brought about in a way that includes all of us, just as Israel was included in the early covenant, the Mosaic covenant. Now, the last thing that I'd like to add on to this, and then see how Fred and the rest of you might think of it.
George Farrick is ready to pounce, man.
Yeah, but he's still on mute. So, George, if you would just hold on until we, the last thing is when we come to Scripture, the first word in Scripture is not the institution narrative as found in the Gospels, is not the John chapter 6, he who eats my flesh and drinks my blood, so on. The first word in Scripture is that of St. Paul. He was written before the Gospels were written. And what he says is first in chapter 11, he talks about the Eucharist. He refers to the institution, but then he makes that deep statement in verse 29, I've got it in front of me, about for anyone who eats and drinks without discerning the body eats and drinks judgment on himself. And that in the minds of too many apologists, which I think is misguided, is that if you don't recognize that this is truly the substantiated body and blood of Christ, you're eating and drinking judgment to yourself. But he's not referring to that. Discerning the body is discerning the presence of Christ in the whole body. And he launches right from there in chapter
into
12,
the mystical
right
body.
into that whole, don't you realize who you are? You are no longer just yourselves. You are the body of Christ, and each one of you is a member of it. So Paul very explicitly links real presence in the sacred meal without necessarily saying transubstantiation, but links the real presence in the sacred meal and the problems that the community was having with how they gathered to the identity of who they are as members of the body of Christ. Now, the last thing that I'd like to say real quickly, a little bit tongue in cheek, is that everybody, even heretics, for the first 10 centuries, the first millennium, accepted the real presence in the Eucharist. It never had to be defined. It didn't have to be part of the early creeds. It was written about by the fathers. It was examined, meditated on, and so on and so forth. But it was only with the rise of scholasticism in the Western Church that they started looking more deeply at, well, just exactly how does this happen? And people started, people stopped receiving the Eucharist a few centuries earlier. And how can we get them back? Well, by emphasizing perhaps that this truly is the body of Christ. And well, if you can't receive it, it really is the body of Christ. So why don't we adore it? There's very little evidence of Eucharistic adoration in the first 10 centuries. Veneration, yes. Adoration, no. So that's kind of my piece. This whole question of transubstantiation came about after 1,000 years of our really being unified. One of the few things Christians were unified on, being unified that Jesus Christ is truly present there because and in order that he may be truly present among us. Now, I'll leave it at that.
Bien dicho. There's this guy, Diarmaid McCulloch, I think his name is, who's an Oxford church historian,
Yeah.
and has sort of ceased being a actively believing Christian because of his homosexuality. But he's written a pretty good, I think, history of Christianity. Not as good as Mike Malloy's, but up there. But anyway, and he said, I remember reading something, he says, until the First Crusade brought Aristotle back to Europe in the 13th century, 13th, 12th century, I guess.
Well,
Aquinas would not have had the vocabulary for his teaching about transubstantiation.
Precisely.
Couldn't have said it. It just wouldn't have existed in the European vocabulary. And so we went from that to a couple of hundred years later, killing people because they wouldn't assent to the vocabulary of transubstantiation. That's certainly interesting. I don't know what to make of it, but it's very interesting.
Well, for one thing, we got used to killing them because we were already very used to killing Jews and Muslims.
Yes. Alas.
He says tongue in cheek. Not entirely.
Yeah. I'm reading a book about the Eichmann trial at the moment, as it so happens. But anyway, okay.
George,
Okay.
I
Listen, pardon me. Go ahead, Ned.
no. I was just going to point to George Ferrick, but maybe I should be quiet.
Ferrick,
George, unmute
comment.
yourself and comment.
Okay,
There
Okay,
he is.
Ned,
Can't
we
hear you,
go.
George.
So Ned, as you were talking, I'm thinking of a gradation of say real presence to the flesh and blood on one end, and then pure symbol on the other end, right? With different things, and maybe the Eucharist is a third thing, because I'm thinking, Ned, that after Jesus said, unless you eat my flesh or drink my blood, he didn't draw out a knife and whack his arm and started giving pieces of himself to the people nearby, nor drain his blood and give it to them to drink. So he obviously didn't mean that, right?
Right. Of course.
So,
In a cannibalistic sense.
right, so it's not that. And I'm thinking about the doctrine, and Fred, maybe you have the name for it, or others of you, but that in Jesus it's truly God and human. Is that Chalcedon?
Yes.
Okay, so to me, in the Eucharist, to George, answer your question, I would say when I receive the Eucharist, I receive bread and wine and Jesus, both. Those who say that the bread is eliminated, that the substance of bread is gone and wine, I'd say no. It's the same thing that Jesus was his body and the divine embodied in the incarnation. So in the Eucharist, it's the same. You don't get rid of Jesus's body. That's a, so that's a thought that comes to me. And I do agree with the idea that when you eat the body of Christ, you go to live the life of Christ. That's what the meaning of it is. And also, we see it as receiving Jesus in communion, but what about Jesus receiving us? We could flip it on its end and say, we're taken up into Jesus. It's not just us consuming Jesus. That's an egocentric way of looking at it. But what if it's Jesus taking us up into his life? And as you say, Fred, we get grace to go out and live the type of life that he lived in the mystical body as you depicted it there, Tom. So anyway, those are the thoughts that go through my mind.
One response to that would be, and I think Granville Henry in the paper that I sent, from a process theology perspective, says process theologians tend to be saying something like the bread is welcoming the superior presence of Jesus, the superior presence of Christ,
while still being bread,
let itself be subsumed into
right,
the greater reality
yes,
of Christ. Now, yeah, you could, from a certain point of view, you could probably say, I am no longer me in union with my beloved. But that's a sort of a metaphorical way, because I am still me in union with my beloved. Similarly, bread is no longer fully bread because it's now in union with Christ, but it is still, as far as anything that we can tell from physical reality, still bread. Now, so I think what you're saying, George, is if we look deeply enough, there really is no contradiction there.
Right. Yeah.
I would
there
say
should be a parallel.
especially.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
there should be a parallel with the incarnation and the Eucharist. And to say that it's not really bread is like saying, well, Jesus really wasn't human.
Yeah.
But if we say Jesus is human and divine, Eucharist is bread and wine, and just what you said, it's taken up with an additional reality. It's subsuming it, but it doesn't obliterate it.
Yeah. Could I just interrupt with two things here? One is an email just came across that breaking news, U.S. Catholic bishops passed a controversial proposal on communion, advancing a push to deny President Biden the sacrament for its stance on abortion. That's the New York Times headline.
I got an email to that effect from the Washington Post. I was just going to read it too.
Oh, geez.
And I got a reply from Phil Berryman. He replies, thanks, Tom. I assume that your meeting is going on. I'm otherwise involved. I'll be happy to join with a little lead time next week, for example.
Okay.
So
that takes care of that. That's good. Why do we struggle so much with this?
Yeah. What's the cash value of trying to figure this out? Is this like how many angels are in the head of a pin?
Yeah.
Is it equivalent to that? I mean, what
Yeah.
is the bottom line here
You know,
about communion? Yeah, what's the big
after
deal?
consecration, the priest says, the mystery of faith. Um, and you know, church fathers say, before the words of consecration, it's bread. After the consecration, it's not. It is changed. It is Jesus. I don't know. And you know, now we're going into philosophical stuff about how we know. Uh, why can't we just say, Jesus told us it was his body and blood? And he at the meal, which contained all of the elements that Fred, you and George Crook, you know, listed, uh, happened. Um, and so I think the more we mess with it in bringing in theorists and trying to square humanity with the bread and et cetera, et cetera. Why not just admit that it's a mystery of faith?
Well, which
Is
is what
there-
which is what the Eastern Church, the Eastern theologians continue
Yeah.
to do. You know, I think they are uniformly sort of shaking their heads, maybe with a smile of disbelief on their face. You know, what are these people talking
We're
about?
overthinking it. We're
We're
overthinking it.
overthinking it. Now,
Yeah.
the other thing that comes to mind is an awful lot is being said today in circles like Richard Rohr about the uh, about dualism and
Mhm.
how we have to get beyond dualistic thinking
Yeah.
and to be thinking of the, you know, is it Jesus or isn't it? That's dualistic thinking. You know, we've got to start. It's not just, well, we oppose dualistic thinking, say, with symbolic thinking. No, holistic thinking is going to kind of be able to integrate the fact that this is such a multifaceted reality, a mystery, that we can probe but never get to the bottom of.
Now, what if we reflect on the here and now? Like, you know how this session turned out, Fred, with Ned and George saying, Fred, I didn't understand what you said in your paper. So I could see us, and let's pretend like Jesus is a little square here, and we're saying, Jesus, we don't understand what you mean when you said about the flesh and blood bit. You know, we're trying to grapple it. And Fred, you went on and you described in like 2 paragraphs using the example of a meal that you had in your home and Erica handing out bread, that something about the meaning of the Eucharist. So would Jesus do something like that with us and say, hey, wait a minute, you guys, yeah, here's what I meant by that. You know, what would he say? And what would he want to have happen to us with what he says? What would he have happen to us in relation to him and in relation to other people?
Well, he said it. At
No,
the,
no. He just left us with a 2-liner. That's not enough. You know, Biden talked to. No, he didn't say a lot about what it meant. He
well,
didn't come back with the questions
what
questions that people had. He didn't say,
what I mean, George, is
because he didn't cut off his flesh and give it to people, and so he didn't mean that. He didn't mean
I
that.
think that's the end.
What
and the
did he
over-
mean?
He did. We had the Last Supper. We had what Fred described. That's how he said it.
But the Last Supper is told in at least 3 different ways in the Gospels. The synoptics have 2 traditions as to just exactly how the order of the words of institution, and then John is totally different, and Paul comes in. I think Paul is similar to Luke, while Matthew is similar to Mark. But if you look at them, there are differences. So it's not even exactly clear exactly what Jesus said.
Are you talking about as far as the words of institution or generally?
Well, I think the words of
Eucharistic.
institution are slightly different in each one. I'd have to go back and parallel them. I did at one time, but you know, uh, and the uh, I don't know. They're not exactly identical. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's right.
Well,
Forgive me for jumping in, Ned. I
Yeah.
have for the last 20 years been very much focused on the day of resurrection and that the true presence of Jesus was not recognized by those who knew him before the resurrection.
Mhm.
And I am receiving not the physical body before the resurrection, but the resurrected Lord. And that's an act of faith. And back to Richard Rohr, it's a both and for me. It's the resurrected body that I receive in the Eucharist.
Uh, let me just add something about what you said earlier, John, which was beautiful. That when it said they recognized him in the eating of the bread, it was in the light of what he told them about the meaning of his life
On
and
that
what the real.
8-mile journey,
Yes, yes. So they had the meanings more clear in their head, and the idea that they saw it and then he disappears. It has mainly to do with the meanings and values, I think, and it doesn't have anything to do with he's not real or real presence. These are realities. His life, death, and resurrection is real. Also, with regard to John 6, uh, I, I I don't know whether I read it in Raymond Brown or where, but uh, two things stand out to me in my memory of whatever I read. On the one hand, when he talks about eating the bread, he uses the word trogon, which was usually meant about animals feeding, chewing, like, and so I would say that in some sense,
Tragar.
um, in some sense, that has to do with uh, Ned's interpretation, which, because he emphasizes what follows from what he calls the real presence, is so important that the two go together. So there's no harm in thinking about the real presence the way Ned wants to think and does think, and that's fine. I think the vast majority of post medieval thinkers or people who receive communion kind of think about it that way, and that's not bad. But also, there was a way in which the meaning of meals was much more clear to people in those days. I would say the symbolism of a meal was much more clear. So they had in a certain sense the whole ball of wax, and I don't think. But the other thing that stood out for me is, I think Brown, but I'm not absolutely sure who it was, put the speech about eating my bread and so forth, eating my body, in the context of manna in the Old Testament.
Mhm.
Yes.
That
Yes.
manna is a prefiguring,
Yes.
and it's a prefiguring in the sense that uh, the Jews had manna, and the manna was really a sign of God's going to be faithful to them, just as he was in delivering them from Egypt. So also through the rest of their constitution as Hebrew people, uh, God's priests and so forth, that they would be the son of God rather than the Pharaoh and so forth. And 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 I think that's important, that they had the manna. Doesn't that means a lot to you? now you have what I'm giving you, and it's
Even
obvious in the line of that, but even more significant. So I think that Ned's interpretation was I thought it was rather valid. But I really thought Tom's bringing together all the things he did was about as close to what I thought I meant as I can think of. But
Well,
I don't think it excludes. I don't think it excludes anything that you've been brought up in terms of your personal piety and how it really has extended into your life, into your sacramental sincerity. So, I don't think we have to disturb that um, at all.
I'd like to um, explain something. I don't see any difference uh, in, I can't understand, George Ferrick, why at least twice you brought up, you know, cut the flesh and take it out. And, you know, I get this image of cutting a piece of Jesus' arm off and eating it. And I must have given you that impression. I don't know where you got that from.
No, I got it from just hearing the words, not from you. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I didn't get it from you at all. Yeah, I
Yeah.
was just getting it because a lot of people have that view of it. Yeah. Just,
Well,
I-
that was a problem in John 6 with the disciples who said, I can't take this.
Well, absolutely. So first, it's abhorrent just to think about it. Secondly, they wonder, how can he possibly do that? And thirdly, in the Old Testament, they're told, you shall not drink any blood, uh, uh, period. And so all of that to the Jewish mind is just crazy. Um, but when Jesus tells us, it's sort of the culmination of what Fred, I think you were saying, all of these incremental preparations, the Exodus, the wandering, the manna, Moses, the bringing to freedom uh, of the Jews. I think all of that is a huge preparation for the freedom that Jesus brings us in a new Exodus and in a new covenant, the covenant of his blood. Um, and I agree with, you know, we don't have to get all shook up when somebody says symbol. There is a meaning there in the meal, which is what it is. Phil makes a point that sometime during Constantine's tenure, that the ministers got separated from the people. Well, I don't know whether it happened then or before or after, but you know, as Christianity spread, you need to find some way to create this community and make it happen. But in the end, I believe that it's in the breaking of the bread. It's in community. I always wondered when we were in the seminary and we went to these little altars and we were servants or servers for each priest that was in that altar space. We were there. There were just two of us and Mass was being celebrated. It always felt there was a certain poverty there, a certain, you know, carencia, because there were just two of us. And it seemed to me that we really needed the whole bunch of us. So I absolutely believe in the community aspect and the things, the elements that you talked about, Fred and George, and but I guess I had a certain, I don't know, concern that we were turning the Eucharist into
A mere
that,
memorial.
well, mere memorial, but that which happens when, you know, Jesus said, whenever two or three are gathered in my name, there I am in the midst. I don't know that the Eucharist is there as it is when we go to Mass and celebrate the sacrifice with all of the elements of the Mass. I don't
Well,
think we can be so loose that that constitutes a Mass.
Could we
Uh,
go
uh,
to, is it possible to consider, in light of what you're saying, that about the community, and I found that too, like on All Souls Day, wouldn't priests actually say three masses because they had so many intentions? You know,
Yeah.
and but what about the headlines today and the use of communion? And then secondly, there was a French woman called Simone Weil who was very attracted to Catholicism but wouldn't become Catholic because she felt it was somewhat exclusionary. You know, the whole thing. She was a worker, and I think she was very impressed with worker priests in France,
Yeah.
but she would not receive communion because of how it excluded people, and she wasn't going to be part of that. So I think she either didn't become Catholic or, yeah, I don't think she did, but that was a big obstacle for her. And so, Tom, you talked about the history of the first 10 centuries of Christianity, and then, and it's almost like communion can become a way of, an institutional way of keeping people in line. You know, all of a sudden,
Mhm.
communion becomes, you can't come to communion, you're in mortal sin. And to get rid of that, you have to come to confession, you have to go to the priest. And so there's a whole power network. You could say Bernie Sanders might say the whole thing is rigged. Look what they did, you know. And so you can't you can't get to God on your own. You can't have his presence with you. You can't be forgiven unless the priest says it. And so blah, blah, blah. So what do you think about all this? Down to where the bishops are saying now that Biden shouldn't be given communion, I guess, or whatever.
no,
So,
they haven't gone that far.
no, okay.
Not yet.
They,
Not as a
they could,
conference.
What did they say, George?
as I understand it, it's just that they authorized the doctrinal committee to prepare a statement about what the Eucharist is.
Oh,
And it might,
Presented in November, right?
yeah, and it might
We'll discuss it in
include, I don't know how their resolution read, but it doesn't necessarily require them to teach about when politicians get to go to communion and don't, although the right wing of those bishops will, you know,
push.
bang their tin cups on the table like just before a prisoner riot, I guess, you know.
So the bishops are going to go through the thing that we're going through right now, and come up with some statement, I guess.
Yeah, but not
Tom-
nearly as intelligently as we are.
And Tom, can you send them the recording of this?
Yeah, right.
Tell them
there-
we've already done their groundwork.
there's-
Yeah.
Let them
there's
that have ears, let them hear.
You know,
Yeah.
when you read the statements of the so-called right-wing bishops in their interviews, it's just nakedly about their authority to say who
Yeah.
a good Catholic is versus Joe Biden's authority to say who a good Catholic is. And for many of them, like Nauman of Kansas City and this idiot in Denver, that's what it's about, is our fucking authority. How dare you, you know? And then there's the George Weigel faction that They want Eucharistic coherence, whatever the hell that means.
Well, they're using that all over the place. Eucharistic coherence.
Fred,
But you know,
Fred, what do you
there's
think
one
that
word,
means?
there's one thing that is behind a lot of the popular, I think, misconception of Eucharist, including with those particular bishops or many bishops. The Eucharist has been commodified.
Yeah.
It's been
Mhm.
reduced to a commodity that we can in some way trade, buy, sell, condition.
Sell futures on and. you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. And you know,
Could also,
God.
could also say
Uh,
weaponized.
What'd you say, Fred?
Could also say weaponized.
oh,
Yeah.
weaponized, yeah.
Well, Fred, you may have something to say about this, or Sue, if she's listening, but I went to All Saints Episcopal Church in Pasadena, where George Regas, the pastor, would say, wherever you are in your journey of faith, you're welcome at the table of the Lord. That's what he said at communion. So a Muslim could come, a woman who just got an abortion, who was there in church for some religious reason, could come and receive communion.
Well,
A
for God's
divorced
sake,
and remarried person.
why are we inviting
And-
sinners to the
Yeah,
table?
why should communion be for the A students, you know? How about, shouldn't it be for precisely the lost sheep? I don't know.
Of course, Leo the 13th said that they don't have a valid Eucharist, so you know it doesn't really make any difference.
The Episcopal, yeah, they're just spinning their wheels.
The litmus test.
So do you see why some people are attracted to Dalai Lama's
Of
saying
course.
that my religion is kindness? That kind of
Mhm.
cuts through a lot of stuff.
Grimmer, I'm reading a book by Richard Rohr on the cosmic Christ, where he deals with, the universality of salvation and election. And Fred, you studied at a Reform university, right?
That's
Which is Calvinism, is what they mean. Is
Yeah.
that where Karl Barth taught?
yeah. I had him as a teacher.
You did?
Yeah. For 4
Wow.
semesters.
Did he have an impact on you?
Oh yeah. One of the things he always repeated, and I think he tried to live up to it, was make the best of it. And so let me just tell you, so I had him 4 semesters, and in the first semester of each of the 2 years before he died,
Wow.
the course was based on studying a text from the scripture, Dei Verbum on Revelation, and then the one on the church, Lumen Gentium. And he said, he made jokes about when it says adhering to the previous councils and so forth. But he took them seriously, and he had a tremendous respect for the Catholic Church. And he had a lot of distress about the liberal Protestant Church. And he thought the Catholics were better off trying to be doctrinally clear about what they actually believed and didn't. Nevertheless, what's true, in the Reformed churches, they would usually have communion once a month rather than at the drop of a hat. And of course, as a Roman Catholic, I said, well, yeah, that's what they think of the Eucharist. And my wife pointed out to me, no. They don't. And a light went on in my head when she said that. And also the idea that when Zwingli and those people said it's a symbol. They were more or less having the same problems we're having today. They didn't mean merely a symbol, because symbols aren't merely. Just think, there could be the procreation of the human race without marriage. But the meanings and values that have to do with married love and married procreation, most of it has to do with meanings and values. Most of it is symbolic. The church seems to me to recognize that when it says that the minister or the people who confect the sacrament are the married couple, not the priest, and so forth. So I think there is a way in which the idea of mere symbol is basically a put down
Yeah.
and a lack of realization of how much our lives are tied up in symbolisms.
Yeah.
Barth, I mean, I've never read his books, although I've read parts of some. But I read somewhere he had a terrific sense of humor.
Oh yeah.
And Pius XII had referred to him as the greatest theologian in Christendom since Aquinas. And Barth supposedly said, when asked about that, you know, I'm going to have to rethink my objections to this papal infallibility thing. I mean, if the
That's
guy has
great.
that story is true, I mean, that's a wonderful sense of humor.
Yeah,
You know?
he had a fantastic sense of humor.
But he was around in the days of, correct me if I'm wrong, Bonhoeffer and the Confessing Church, and,
Sure.
and
That's right.
you know,
Bonhoeffer accused him of revelational positivism.
I like the term.
whatever that may be.
And someone brought it up one time in the seminary. And at the end of each semester, when he said what he would do the next semester, he'd always say, "Wenn ich noch am Leben bin." If I'm still alive, here's what we're going to do.
Bonhoeffer would say that.
During the courses, he often said, "Yes, that's the first thing I'm going to ask Bonhoeffer when I die. What did he mean by
This is
revelation?"
Barth. Yeah.
So yeah, he was a wonderful character, and just a winning spirit, and I would say brilliant.
So Fred, it seems that your theological training was very ecumenical
Yeah.
Uh,
and broad.
that's pretty true.
Yeah.
My recollection, Fred, is
For a time, I was the only Catholic in the faculty.
I understood.
Where? Where was that?
University of Basel.
Oh, you mean as a student?
Yes.
Yeah, as a student. Okay.
I understood, Fred, that you left Rome in order to go to Basel and study with Karl Barth.
Well, I wanted to go to the German context because Lonergan gave me the impression, he didn't say this, but he always asked me, "Did you read this German book or that German book?" And I would say, "Well, I have to read the Spanish translation." But so I was determined to get into the German context.
Mhm.
And so what I did was I had a meeting one time with Lukas Fischer, who was the head of the World Council of Churches then, Protestant. And he said, "Well, I went to the University of Basel. Why don't you go there?" And I thought, yeah, why don't I?
That was easy.
But it was, but people that we read in theology,
There's Rudolf Bultmann.
like Oscar Kuhlman
Yeah.
and Bo Reicha and several people that were well known. I had read their books and so forth. I thought, well, yeah, that sounds good to me. And I must say, it turned out to be a wonderful experience. Partly because it's in Basel, and one of my fellow students was going to do his dissertation on Balthasar. And so he would have Balthasar over to his house and invite me to.
Wow.
So it was a
Wow.
wonderful thing. It was a
I'm
wonderful
getting a
thing.
nosebleed just thinking.
Oh my goodness, that's fantastic.
Thin air.
It was, well, so my,
It's in
my
the
job
mountains,
not
Switzerland.
investigating more universities, in retrospect, it made me feel like it was providential that I
Yeah.
drifted up there.
Yes.
What is the Reform teaching about the Eucharist?
Well, I think it depends which Reformed group. So you have the North German Reformation, which has the big Luther, with whom we almost tend to identify the Reformation. But the South German Reformation was done in city states, kind of in southern Germany and on the other side of the Rhine in Switzerland and so forth. And there you had different brands of people. Of course, the most important was Calvin in Geneva, but there was Zwingli and Zurich and so forth, and others, Ecolampadius, and just a host of others. So it's not a uniform thing. But
Well, when I said
basically,
Reform, I meant essentially Calvin.
yeah, Calvin. One of the things I had the good fortune to be with was a guy, a Presbyterian fellow, a Presbyterian minister, came to Basel in order to study the works of Calvin. And unlike Luther, what Calvin did, he was different from Luther insofar as he wasn't just a fighter about grace and so forth, and trying to, in a certain sense, define himself over against the Catholic, what he thought was inauthenticity. But he went and read the fathers of the church, and he was very concerned with what in England they call churchmanship. In other words, the community. And so he knew that the communion service, the Eucharist, was very, very integral to having a community. Now, I think certainly when sometimes you meet Lutherans and they say if you went to the Lutheran church, you'd see it's almost just like the Catholic. So that would have been true, but in many ways. But so he was more in the zone of the things that Tom Welber was saying. That he called it, they would have called it symbolic, but not symbolic in the sense that there wasn't something, the seriousness that Ned associates with the real presence was exactly the seriousness with which they treated the Eucharist.
Mhm.
And I had no doubt about that. But I would have walked in there with doubt. I would have taught that was not
Did you go to some of their church services, Fred?
sure.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I mean, there is a certain sense in which I'm married to a person who is not Roman Catholic. She's as Catholic as can be, but more or less in our context, we went to Catholic church, and but there we often went to Protestant churches, but we also went to the old church across the Rhine where it was a mass of people who were not certainly not upper middle class the way that was on our side of the Rhine, and we felt a lot more comfortable there at Clara Platz. And that's where I heard Balthasar preach. And I remember him saying, one of the lines I remember from one of his sermons was, "The Eucharist is a thing of the people." And I think that's the way the Calvinists did think about it.
Hmm.
So that's my take. And you know, in the did you ever see the movie Tender Mercies?
Yes,
That's
did.
one of your favorites, isn't it, George?
yes. The communion scene at the end of that movie. Remember?
Yeah. And remember when he and his wife's son went to be baptized as adults, and Robert, whatever his name was.
Duval.
Right.
I
And
don't remember that.
they were riding along in whatever they were riding on in, but they were riders, not driver and passenger. And they asked each other, "Oh, well, do you feel different?" And they both said, "No." But as George knows, that word "tender mercies" comes up in the proper of the Mass of Episcopalians, and that's what rung a bell for me. Tender mercies. That's a seriously, I think, religious. And your classmate Rick Cassidy thought the world of that movie, oddly enough. Anyway,
I
so-
saw it shortly after meeting Herbert, and it just knocked my socks off.
I can believe it.
You know,
Yeah, George Herbert, wonderful. Yeah.
you know, one thing about Herbert, about once a year, either at my motion or his motion, I would go down to Loyola and be his acolyte when he said a solo mass room kind of mass, Ned. And I never ceased to shock me what he would do, because he would say, "Okay, George, and here comes the canon of the Mass," you know, and he'd have me say all the prayers aloud, and he just stood there pretty much until the words of consecration. Now, he said those, but the rest of the canon, you know, was, George Crook got to recite. And he'd chime in on some prayers, and then like concelebrate, you know, and
Yeah.
it was an extraordinary experience with Herbert.
Classic mentor.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I'd call it that, John. No, I'm kidding. Yeah. Anyway, da-dum. That movie, Tender Mercies, I can't recommend. Maybe it's not as good as I remember it, because it's a lot to be said for the time, you know, in which you see something. But boy, I saw it at a time when all things were new.
Quid
Yeah.
huh?
Which goes for the Eucharist as well, my friend.
Yes. Fred, do you remember the last scene of the movie?
No. What was it?
There had been several people in the movie who had died. And one of them was a black kid who uh, died wrongfully. I don't remember the exact circumstance, but somebody shot him in a kind of a racist setting. And so the last scene in the movie is all these folks that have struggled so hard, you know, through the Depression and came so close to losing everything and had to do their true grit stuff and all that, find themselves in church. And it's, you know, some sort of, it's not high church Anglicanism. I don't remember what the church was. And so when it comes time for communion, all of a sudden you see that the congregation is riddled with these people who have died. When you know, do you remember?
Yeah, now it's coming back a little bit. Yeah. Wow.
Tom Welber's The Mystical Body.
Amen.
Yeah, it was very powerful, I thought, you know, in 1989. Imagine I still think so today. Hope so.
So Tom, you know, I appreciate your sharing Granville Henry's paper, and I want to reread it, but could you just say something about him? I think you were the one who were at his baptism or baptized him.
No, I received him into the church.
Oh,
Into the-
okay, because
into-
he was already
I
baptized.
received
Yeah.
him into full communion with the Catholic
Right.
Church. We made it
Yeah.
very, very sure, very clear that his baptism
Right.
was
Yeah.
perfectly valid and recognized. And
Yeah.
but his journey as a you know, as I think it was Methodist minister,
Yeah, yeah.
and being increasingly drawn to Rome and through actually, I mean, he was a part of, but not a big part, not one of the big names of the uh, process theology crowd in Claremont. And had you know, had studied Whitehead's process thought considerably, even though Granville was not really a theologian nearly so much as a philosopher of mathematics. And he taught both philosophy and mathematics in Claremont. And just an absolutely, absolutely gentle soul. He came with me. He and his wife Tess came on the first early Christian world pilgrimage that I led to Turkey, and I think that may have been right around the time Granville I received into the church before Tess. And it was in the early 2000s. Tess wanted to go through the entire RCIA just for the experience. And Granville basically didn't have a lot of patience with it because he had already walked that road. And so, you know, we kind of all discerned together that I would receive Granville into the church, and then Tess would be part of the community being welcomed on the Easter Vigil, which was a And it was a very agreeable thing for both of them. But so, Granville talks probably more than he did anywhere else, to my knowledge, about his own personal journey in that paper. He has another, which I want to look up. It's a book that is no longer in print, called Christianity and the Images of Science. And in that, he basically says, the guiding spirit for Christianity's view of God since the Reformation has been Newtonian physics. And he proposed a bit of a direction towards how can we utilize what's the word for the
Quantum
physics? Yeah. How can we utilize the insights of quantum physics to influence our way of approaching God? Because in quantum physics, we don't have the mechanical certainties that you do in Newtonian physics. And theology, both Catholic and Protestant, has tended to aim for mechanical certainties. And so I've got to look that book up. What I may do, if I find it again, it's somewhere in a box outside, but I can scan it quite easily.
Tom, I found a copy online
Oh, okay.
from a used bookstores.
Uh-huh.
So I felt it was a rare opportunity, so I paid
Oh, you got it.
$8 and it'll be coming in a week or two. Yeah,
Good.
from Abe Books.
Uh-huh.
You sounded very, very impressed by that, George.
Yeah.
It
Yeah,
was,
well, good. Granville was he was never particularly recognized outside of a fairly small number of people, and very unassuming. But I think he was a uniquely sensitive thinker.
Is he still alive?
Yes, his
Okay.
wife died. Tess died about a year and a half ago.
Uh-huh.
But he is still with us. I haven't been in touch with him for about 6 or 8 months. I really need to. I inherited a lot of Tess's books on feminism, and one of the things that Tess was extremely interested in were the women in the Byzantine times and the women in the apostolic times. We visited several of the places near and dear to St. Thecla, including what in the mid 2000s, 2006, was newly uncovered frescoes in what had been a sort of abandoned and forgotten cave, which was a Byzantine shrine way back when, Cave of St. Paul, on the slope of Mount Nightingale above Ephesus. And in that cave is a very striking portrait of Paul, which may be one of the earliest of portraits of Paul, with his finger up this way, or two fingers, in a gesture of teaching. And beneath him is Thecla in looking up admiringly, sitting in a window. And on the other side is Thecla's mother, Theoclia, adopting exactly the same gesture as Paul, admonishing him, lay off my daughter. She's going to get married, and she doesn't want to get married to the guy that I've chosen to marry her, and that sort of thing. And Paul seems to, insofar as the legend might have grains of truth to it, Paul seems to have been rather embarrassed by Thecla and her latching onto one aspect of his teaching that I don't think he was emphasizing that much, and that was virginity. And the story goes that he refused to baptize her, so she baptized herself, and then became an apostle, and sort of a self-styled apostle. But she's recognized as a saint. In fact, she is one of the patrons of the Daughters of St. Paul.
Oh,
They have in fact, the co-foundress of the Daughters of St. Paul was Mother Thecla, Thecla Merlot.
aha.
They took the virginity thing more seriously.
Oh, yeah. She was one of those who, yeah, I guess there were a fair number in the early church who really, I think in a lot of ways saw virginity as the way to be an independent agent without having to depend on a man.
Yeah. They could
Well,
go where,
supposedly that was a big deal with the Middle Ages, with women
Yeah.
going
Yeah,
into convents.
yeah. I mean, I think the tradition is fairly unbroken that this is a way to escape patriarchy. So, for what
Yeah.
that's worth, Tess actually came 3 times to Turkey with me on the pilgrimages. And in 2008, which was one pilgrimage that was plagued right from the start, with everybody came down with some kind of a respiratory infection. Tess almost died of pneumonia on that one.
wow.
And it was kind of special to me in a sense because she couldn't come back with a group. So I stayed in Istanbul with her. She was in a hospital, a German hospital in Istanbul, and I was staying in the hotel adjacent to where the group had been put up. The travel agent put me up there in what was a little closet that had been transformed into a room, and the hotel was rat infested, and you could smell it. And I would go and visit her in this German hospital for like it was 5 or 6 days, and I would just envy her being in that hospital because I had to go back to that rat infested
Oy.
horrible hotel.
Yeah.
I have a quiz to give you guys. But Bremer, you have to go last. And the question is, I'm reading a quotation from the Washington Post by an American Catholic bishop. And the question is, which bishop is this? Okay, so here's what he says. Our credibility is on the line. The eyes of the whole country are on us. If we don't act courageously, clearly and convincingly on this core Catholic value, how could we expect to be taken seriously on another matter? So, who's your guest, Tom?
Naumann?
Huh?
Naumann?
No.
Andy
Gomez.
Corleone.
Yes.
Oh, Cordileone, yeah.
That I was certain. You,
Yeah.
as soon as you nailed me,
That's
I
right.
met Cordileone several times at the Napa Institute, and I could not. He celebrated a pontifical mass that lasted over 2 hours.
A lot of
He
people
was-
going to communion?
it
Oh,
was-
John,
Everybody. Nobody declined.
all 100 of you, right?
Yeah, yep. Anyway, I
Well,
could
of course,
only
the
stand,
Napa Institute has to be in the state of grace.
How could it be well, what about his vesting, John? Tell that story.
well, he came in not vested, and he had 6 acolytes who vested him, and it took 14 minutes of ceremonial vesting before the mass itself could start. I
Was
swear
there-
it's true.
And was there incense too?
Oh my God, yes.
For the
best-
vesting, I mean, in between each garment.
Yeah.
And the mass was in any particular language, John?
Oh, it was in English, but all vestments of the Latin Rite. Yeah.
A
George, do you still-
maniple and
George Crook, do you still have those pictures of
Cardinal Burke.
Cardinal Burke in his regalia?
Oh,
Yeah.
with the-
Why don't you send them out? That's a hilarious kind of thing.
Okay, yeah, George Ferrick and Fred Lawrence haven't seen him.
No, I haven't seen him now.
Oh, what a pompous fool. Anyway, if he had a vote in Washington, we know how he voted.
Hmm.
You know, this is a guy that didn't want to allow Ted Kennedy to have a Catholic burial, Cardinal Burke.
Hmm.
You know, Fred, I'm so angry about that because I spent 7 years married outside of the church and going to mass and communion pretty much every day. And every now and then somebody would say, George, you should get married in the church or get an annulment. And my response was nuts to that. You know, I just wouldn't concede the power of the church to try to deprive me of the Eucharist, whatever it may be.
Like your bishop brother-in-law.
Well, he gave me communion all that time.
No, but I mean, he say, George, isn't it time?
Oh yeah, he did say that. So did Herbert.
Oh,
And
you-
Betty never stopped saying it. So finally I threw in the towel, and I'm glad I did. I mean, going through the annulment thing is helpful, you know. It's also quite complex and burdensome. And, you know, I'm an attorney and I found it a little oppressive. I can only imagine what
Yeah.
most people do. Fred, I have a request. Could you give us a presentation sometime on the power of evil or theodicy or all of that? This is personally my biggest doctrinal or faith problem. What's the distinction? Difficulty. You know, I mean, how could there have been the Holocaust? How can there be tsunamis? But you know, is that a possibility? Have you given that? I imagine you've given that at least passing thought over your career.
Well, it comes up every time you say the Our Father. Your will be done
On earth, yeah.
as
Yeah,
it is.
deliver us from evil.
Mhm.
Yeah, that too. And so it's that problem is built into that prayer. That you have to somehow accept the fact that there is the objective surd of sin all over the place. And there would have to be if that's what Jesus had to overcome.
Well, but he overcame it. Why is it still around?
Oh,
Where's the
Don't-
stake through its heart?
Don't you remember the gospel saying, take up your cross?
Yeah.
There it is. There it is. But still, okay, we could say a little about that.
Yeah, I mean, when you were in Europe, when you were in Rome, did you take a side trip up to Poland ever?
No, I never did.
Yeah, I think in those
I
days,
did go to outside
Dachau.
of Munich is
Dachau.
Dresden. Yeah, yeah. Also, Johann Baptist Metz, you heard of him. Okay?
Yes.
His mother lived in Munich,
Mhm.
and he was always saying very often, and when I was together with him, he came to BC for a year, and I translated all his lectures from German into English.
Wow.
He said his mother lived in a place in Europe where, excuse me, in Munich, where she could smell the smoke coming from the incinerator.
Hmm.
And still never ever paid any attention to it.
Well,
Never realized it was.
I never put it together that this was human flesh, you mean?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, why would you, you know?
Well, well, why would you not?
Well, even
I mean, is
because
there
it's
some,
so barbaric. Who would do such a thing? You know, we're Germany. I mean, you know, Beethoven lived down the street, you know, that type of thing. I don't know.
That mindset of human and subhuman.
What are you saying, George? That the people were so barbaric, or that it was so barbaric that the people couldn't fathom it?
I'm saying the latter. I'm not sure that's true. I mean, you know, how do you live within a few miles of Dachau and not know what Dachau is?
Yeah, that doesn't make sense.
But I guess, Fred, Metz's mother was contending or saying she had no idea, right?
well, what about Greenville?
Well, he was trying to make the point that one of the, if you really are serious about grace, you wouldn't smell that and not have it make any impression,
Yeah.
even though you were a daily communicant. And so, that was after he made the political turn from Karl Rahner discipleship. And he had really wonderful things to say about that. But one thing you said, for one of the constitutive things about evil is that it has no reason. That's what makes it evil. It's an absence of being intelligent and reasonable. And so it's a non-choice in the sense that real choice, since the will is a faculty that is responding to the intelligibility of the intellect, if you're deliberating about courses of action and you know which is the right course of action, but you choose something besides the right course of action, it doesn't make sense. And that's really what's so off-putting about evil. And not only in the fact of Dachau, but also the fact that people could filter it out and not have any reaction to it.
Thank you.
So grace, in a certain sense, for Metz, has to do with being able to be alert to evil that's growing in time to stop it. Something that we're having to face now with the GOP,
Mhm.
Yeah.
et cetera.
Yep.
But it's gone so far that will we ever be able to stop it? God knows. But I mean, it's taking a lot of people what's happening in relation to January 6th to understand the gravity of the problem.
Well, I mean, I have a good friend who just doesn't think it was all that big a deal. You
Yeah.
know, January 6th. I mean, no, it's not like they stormed the place with guns, George, you know. Yeah, they had baseball bats, okay.
They were throwing metal poles right through the entrances, and that doesn't feel too good if it hits you in the face.
No,
Yeah,
I think it was an extremely serious act, you
Yeah.
know.
yeah. I know, Fred, I can remember from Insight, reading Lonergan's book about the surd, kind of what you said, and also periods of progress and decline and different types of biases and oversight, not being concerned about insight, kind of a blockage. Maybe that could figure into what you say. Kind of I think there's different types of evil, George, because you mentioned tsunami, earthquakes, you know, there's accidents that happen where somebody maybe was careless in driving a car, or as opposed to just somebody shooting somebody, thinks the person's in a gang, but it's just an innocent person who gets killed. Because in the LA Times, I saw where the son, the black son of a black man who was going around investigating police behavior with blacks, he was kind of recording them. His own son died from a shooting, not by the police, but it's just a total loss of life.
Yeah.
And murder rates are rising in the cities,
Are they ever?
including LA.
Are they ever?
Well, and then we have that, whatever position, social or political position you take, you can identify evil in some way with the other side.
That's what's
I mean,
crazy.
I mean, if you're a Democrat, and accepting abortion as a legitimate part of ordinary health care, there's something evil about accepting the wholesale killing of human infants, fetuses. On the other hand, if you're, the whole social justice and environment and the evil that we see on the Republican side of the polarization, neither side seems to recognize their own participation in evil.
Well, that's true. I gotta admit, I mean, 20 years ago, I was doing pro bono work for the Right to Life League against abortion. And I wouldn't today,
Mhm.
and I'm trying to figure out why have I changed my mind on this subject. I'm not sure why I have. I'm struggling with it. And Ned and I talk about it all the time, because he has not, he doesn't agree with me, that, I mean, I'm basically in the position abortion should be tolerated. And that's hard to square with some bishops we know.
Well, I think, one thing on that line, and I'm not sure where that would stand today, but, in the 70s, 80s, 90s, even early 2000s, when many countries were legalizing abortion, most of the legalization of abortion throughout much of the world where it happened, I think, was as, okay, this is not good, but in a just society, for the good of society, we are tolerating something that is not good. Here in the United States, right from the 1970s, it has been held as a right, a civil right under the right of privacy.
Well, more than that, it's almost for many people, a sacrament. I think it's evil. I think it's
Yeah.
sinful. I just don't think it should be against the law
It's,
anymore.
it's interesting because in the pre-modern era, it never was really thought that abortion was a great idea. But the way the moral theologians thought about it, it was really not the right of the fetus or the young baby, but it was what it does to the mother.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And that was brought home to me very clearly one day when my daughter, she may have been in my class one day when I said something about abortion, and she told me, be careful the way you talk about that, because it's almost sure to be the case that some
Mhm.
girl in your class has had an
Mhm.
abortion.
Yeah.
And that really that brought home that thought that, gee, that it's so terrible for the women who have to do that,
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
yeah.
who think they have to, or whatever.
Yeah.
And so, but that rights idea is it's a pesky one.
Oh,
Mhm.
wow.
It's not really part of natural law.
Mm-mm.
What, the
Folks,
notion of
folks, I'm gonna have
rights?
to go, so I'm signing
Okay.
off. Okay,
We've hit
Okay.
the time.
We've
yeah,
hit
I
the
have to
time.
sign off,
So,
but don't
Is it
let
already?
me break up the party. Okay, bye.
Thank
Bye,
you.
George.
bye, George.
God bless.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Tom, are we likely to have Phil Berryman as our guest next
Do
week?
do we want him?
Sure.
That will make us 7, and that's fine too. Assuming you're still with us, Fred.
Next week I won't be able to be
Okay.
because I have a week-long workshop that
Ah.
lasts Friday as well,
Okay.
and I'm sort of the conductor or whatever.
So,
Sorry, yeah, I would
should-
have to miss that.
should we just have the 5 of us, or should we join, ask Phil to join us next week?
You know, I
Well,
think we've at least for my part, the phase that we went through with respect to the Eucharist perception, community, etc. I feel fairly good about it. If anybody thinks we need to, and I thought that was, I mean, I've got 50 pages of stuff that was, correspondence, and I've read a lot of it, and most of it. And I think we've vetted that quite a lot. Do we need to debrief about anything else before?
John Paul wrote, I found out, I think in that piece about Tom's friend at Claremont, there were references to a what do you call it? Encyclical on the Eucharist by John Paul.
Yeah.
And I'd like to read that. I find him a very interesting presenter of things in his encyclicals. I don't know if it'll cause me to have any different thoughts. I guess he'll probably drive me back to what Fred sort of identified as the Ned position, which I shared some, at least,
Somebody's
wanna
gonna
believe-
explain to me what the net position is, but we can do that later.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you got some comfort from Fred today about it, didn't you?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Yeah.
I just want all those God molecules floating around in my blood.
Oh, Tom, what do you think?
I am comfortable either way. I like the five of us debriefing, but I feel like what's gone on with the bishops' conference might make it a welcome piece to have Phil with us next week. So I'm in favor of inviting him, but I'm comfortable if we put it off another week as well.
And the other thing is, this week is going to be a very lively one for opinions being batted around everywhere.
Yeah.
So maybe we will have a lot to kind of, well, grill Phil about with regard to Eucharist also, or, you know, our conversations, as Fred is certainly finding out, our conversations have been wide ranging. And often there's 4 or 5 things that we've talked about in any one session. We originally were going to talk for, you know, an hour, and it very naturally went to 2 hours, and then sometimes we spill over a little. It certainly is an evolving thing.
It is, and it's I think it's evolving in a really good way, and you know, we're individually sometimes John call me, I'll call him, and we'll talk about our conversations. I think sooner or later we'll start maybe having some traditional kinds of parameters. I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah.
I'm
Just for your information, my my Zoom account, Pro account, will handle 100 participants.
Oh.
Oh, great.
Well,
I don't know
go
how
out
we
into
would
the
handle 100
highways and
participants.
byways, right?
But,
But the gallery would be little tiny, you know.
yeah. Yeah, well, you've seen those caricatured in various meetings. That's probably
yeah.
the way the U.S. bishops work.
Yeah.
Ay, pendejos.
Yeah.
You know what a pendejo is?
Not nice.
A great fool. I mean, that's putting it, sort of sanitizing
Gently.
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Unfortunately, the Mexican fans at the soccer match between US and Mexico used that as a chant against every positive that the Americans did.
That was, several of the Mexican guys used to come to the workshop, and they invited a few of us to the University of Mexico City, Ibero-Americana. And the first thing I asked the person who picked me up and brought me is, what does pendejo mean?
As a translator, you need to know.
There's a whole bunch of other ones. Pinche cabrón, you know.
You pick up the intonation.
Oh yeah.
Or how bad it is.
It's funny when you learn a second language, somehow the swear words and profanities in that language don't seem as bad as those in your own language.
Yeah.
They're kind of like play
I
profanity.
experienced,
you know?
yep, I experienced that.
Yeah.
Yep.
So sometimes we use them a little more freely and liberally, and you know, somebody from that culture will, you know, sit there and say, what?
Yeah, well, I remember the time I called you that because I had asked you what it meant. You said
Yeah.
stupid. So I let loose and called you one, and you know, your mom was standing there and was not edified.
No.
So
Well, on that happy note, shall we?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
well.
How
thank
we
you,
get on
everybody.
with our day.
Okay.
Is Phil coming or not, guys?
Well, you'll just be advised in due course.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, okay, the real question is, should I, after our meeting now, invite him to join us next week?
I say yes.
I say yes.
I'm up. Yeah.
I thought he took for granted in his statement that he was just gonna come.
Yeah.
He sort of did, he sort of
Yeah,
did.
yeah.
Yeah. Sounds like.
So I'll do it.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you for all the work you do.
Yes.
Yeah, keep it up, Fred.
Okay, and as you know, I am recording this, so I will do my usual thing and put it privately up on YouTube if you want to check it out or check any part of it out or whatever.
I think
Are
that
past-
gives us an undue importance, but what
Are
the
the
heck?
past conversations also, how long do they stay accessible?
As long as I keep them accessible.
Oh, good. Okay, so the ones that you've recorded are still there for us to,
I will send a link to all of them,
wonderful.
all of the past. I'll put it together with the date, and so you can check them out. And I can delete them
Not yet.
if we want to, or keep them. I'm definitely not going to make them publicly available, but they will be privately available.
Great.
Bravo.
Okay.
God bless you all.
Well,
bless
on
you
that
all.
happy note,
Thanks, Fred.
Thanks so
Thanks,
much.
John. Thanks, John. Thanks, George.
Fred, thank you. Okay.